So we have a broad implementation now of BIM in the industry, so we can start looking at other things, and definitely that's also what I see happening, and see a lot of interesting companies doing that. Also seeing the realization among contractors that you need to look at other stuff, that you actually need to integrate technology in your process. And again, Ulrich is a great example with SiteHub, but there are a few other good examples for that.
And I think that that's why I always use our Danish experience when we do speak to other organizations, and also when we are in other countries. We can see that the development of digitization and now Contech in Denmark has been progressing for the last, it's almost 20 years, I guess, since the first BIM mandate, for example, came in Denmark. And that's what had the real big effect, where all public projects had to follow this standard, had to be delivered in this way. And other countries don't have that policy yet.
No.
And that's maybe where their biggest challenge is, because we can't leave it up to the private sector to develop uniformly across the industry, because it'll just naturally do this, whereas the public sector has the power and the bandwidth to develop our industry as a whole, and that's what has happened to Denmark effectively.
It definitely is, and I mean it is in multiple ways. So one is like the mandate that you're mentioning, but it's also the public infrastructure.
Yeah.
So MitID, the tax system, the building registration, and all this public infrastructure. I mean, I'm German, which you might be able to hear by my accent. Been moving here in 2003, and there already was an online tax system in place, working quite well 20 years ago. I mean, Germany has been trying to implement that over the last two or three years. So the public infrastructure really makes a difference in Denmark and the Scandinavian countries when it comes to digitalization. I think the other thing that makes a difference is the innovation and the financing model of innovation. The innovation model and the financing of that is also a little bit different here in the Nordics, which also opens some opportunities. So funding of innovation is typically also a public or a philanthropic thing, especially when you look into the context sector. So it is the Innovationsfonden, it is the public funding, the public support, or it is the Realdania Industriens Fond, these philanthropic organizations that drives that development, and that also makes that innovation often has a little bit broader focus than just we need to build something for ourselves, and we need
return on investment.
We need to return on investment as quickly as possible. Which is the model that much of the rest of the world is working on. It's venture capital, and that forces you to focus much more into, as you're saying, return on investment, and also sometimes a little bit too aggressive growth.
Yeah, so it's a much more narrow focus rather than that philanthropic, as you mentioned, where it's more of a social impact. How can we improve not just our process here in the industry, but then for the greater good as a whole?
And how can we do something together? I mean, these philanthropic foundations will force you. If you take the money, you need to share your result, your knowledge. And I think again, referring back to BIM, that actually also has been driving the Danish BIM agenda, is that we all the time have been talking. We had shared projects. We have been developing shared methods in BIM, and that is a strong foundation that we're having. And I think that is also what we're trying to do with Contech, and what we need to do with Contech is to have this common understanding, this common way of doing stuff. So we get this broader foundation instead of having a few companies that make a lot of value to themselves.
It's an interesting approach, and I remember seeing it's 6 or 7 years ago now, the digital strategy for digital transition in the Danish public authority that was developed in the late 90s or something, or early noughties. I think maybe it was 2000, and the first implementation was 2001. And as you mentioned, you had that MitID that it's called now, back in 2003. And it's amazing because it has set the mindset within Danish society of being able to work digitally and that approach to digitization, it's not such a scary thing anymore because, well, we need to be able to operate in our daily, as personally in our daily working lives when we communicate with, the public authorities and whatever the structure may be. So it has a big influence on contact now, I would say.
And this sharing data thing is not as frightening in Denmark. I mean, it is. I mean, it is also an issue. It's also something that we discuss, but it is not at the level as our southern neighbors, as for example Germany, who's very much afraid of sharing data with each other. And I think that is also one of the things we can build build on in order to work with the next big thing, which is AI, artificial intelligence. Needs data.
It needs data, and it needs good quality data, and that data needs to be shared.
Yeah.
We talk about that quite a bit, actually, from a cost management perspective. Very few organizations or clients want to share their cost information with anybody. And the reality is, in order to improve the industry, our argument is that you need to share it.
Yeah.
I want you to assess the budget I've prepared so that if there's any gaps you might see as a specialist architect or engineer, then you should be doing that, or sharing it with the contractor as well, and be open source about this kind of stuff so that we can learn from each other. It's one of the bigger transitions in the future, I think, but we'll come back to that later on. But what's the new hot topic in contact then in Denmark at the moment? What's really exciting you guys are working on?
It's not a tough question, but because the obvious answer is AI, is artificial intelligence.
That's so broad at the moment. That can be anything and everything. But
I think what's interesting about AI is that it again opens the door for a new group that starts interesting for technology. So I haven't been talking to as many contractors and craftspeople over my whole career, over the last 15 years, than I have the last 6 months. So,
really?
So I was out at the what's it called, Københavns Tømmerlag, so the Carpenter Association, and I mean, they would never have invited me to talk about BIM or IoT or blockchain or all the other stuff that I've been talking about. But they really wanted to learn about AI, and they really wanted to discuss AI. And I think that is one of the big opportunities currently for Contact is we can finally start to discuss technology with that group, which actually is crucial in order to improve our performance, both in terms of sustainability and on productivity. That are the guys that are
on the ground, right?
That are the guys on the ground that currently are working very very non-digital, and I'm not necessarily talking about robots.
No.
Here, I'm more talking about improving the planning and the availability of information. And all these things to these guys. I think robots is a little bit down the line, but I think we can give these folks a lot more information and make their documentation work a lot easier with using AI.
That's a big discussion we're having at the moment, and I'll reflect on Ireland. Big discussion we're having there at the moment is how do we bring SMEs, the small to medium enterprises, into the digital discussion right now, because a lot of the companies that service our industry, the carpenters, the moor, the block layer or the bricklayer, they're guys that are working in, or girls that are working in their vans. They're going to site every day, driving there to do the labor aspect of that, and a lot of them might not have the headspace to learn something new. And so the big question is, how do we also bring this entire supply chain on the journey of digital transformation?
I see AI is a way in, because people are generally curious about it. And I think also, to me, AI is a little bit more or the current wave of AI. So we're talking about GPTs and generative AI. I think to me, it's a bit more similar to the mobile phone. It's a bit more similar to social media, to internet, than it is to blockchains, IoTs, and these things, because it actually improves the individual person. So it's not something that is necessarily a company rollout, at least not yet. It's more, I can use this and get a little better in my work, or get a little bit better in my what's it called, leisure activities. So,
and I think the accessibility to it, as you mentioned, is is of interest to people, because they're looking at it at home on their mobile devices, going, what actually is that, like ChatGPT, for example, and that sparks an interest. Whereas blockchain technology is not something you're sitting at home kind of testing, because well, that capability is super difficult, I would say.
Definitely. So we need somehow to use this interest and transfer it to something that is business relevant, that is construction relevant.
Yeah.